Welcome to a paratrooper and a yogi walk into a bar. No longer in a bar because now that we're live, it's just cups and living rooms. Nonetheless, welcome. I just walked into my own living room and there he is, the He-Man of historians, Andrew Fox. And that's Mr. Andrew Fox on Substack and X.
With the typical plugs for our other stuff done, let's get straight to the main business. What are you talking about today?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is that young comment. Thank you very much, because I've got like 10 years on you or something.
That's just all the yoga making you look so youthful, clearly.
That's right. I'll take the young wherever I can get. I'm about to turn 54, so I'm not sure how well that translates. But anyway, before we start our discussion today, which is going to be about the battle damage assessments, the BDAs that people have heard so much about, let me talk about something that we've also heard so much about. So as the show's resident Jew, and I know that some people think you're Jewish, but guys, just to clear the air, keep the comments that are vilely anti-Semitic low with him, because he's actually not Jewish. You can just put them right on me. I am the Jew in the bar. Anyway, in light of the Mamdani primary win for Intifada and the Glastonbury Hamas Festival, I just want to say that there are so many efforts, and really from so many different angles, including the pro-Israel world, which confounds me, to sort of mitigate the fact that everything, and I really at this point mean everything, about the worldwide response to the Israel war, or against Israel and the Jews in this war, is anti-Semitic. Now, here's what I want to say. It's not because legitimate criticism of the Jewish state is anti-Semitic. Okay, we've established that over and over again. But because double standards are anti-Semitic, and the mass hysteria across the free world surrounding this war and this war only, and taking the unprecedented defense of terrorists over a democracy is proof of that. And Andrew, if we're going to be totally honest, you and I are here today because of this anti-Semitism fueled circus of so-called civilization. The very fact that we feel the need, and so many people feel the need to have these podcasts, is because of these double standards. We're not here discussing the $183 billion that the U.S. has given to aid Ukraine since February 2022, but instead the $23 billion, which is such a tiny fraction, that's been given to Israel since October of 2023. Likewise, we're not here to talk about the more than 150,000 who have been murdered in the Sudanese civil war, or the 25 million who are facing acute food insecurity there. These double standards are anti-Semitic. Triple standards are even worse. And this is why the whole world is focusing on Israel and drawing such conclusions that are driven by the media. That you just wrote the most amazing Substack regarding the BBC.
Shana's dropped out. The fact that it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. Of course it's not. There's loads of stuff we can criticize Israel for. There's not a kind of free pass for the state of Israel just because anti-Semitism exists. What I think we are facing here is something slightly different, though, and that is people are criticizing them for stuff that comes from an anti-Semitic disinformation campaign from malign actors. I think that's the really critical difference here. So there might well have been a lot of young people at Glastonbury this weekend who genuinely think a genocide is happening. They might genuinely hold that belief and think it's appalling. There might be people who genuinely think the IDF is systematically committing war crimes because that's what they've seen and been utterly deluged with on social media, in other parts of the news media. But the critical point to note is that this is coming from an anti-Semitic campaign by countries like Qatar, Iran, Pakistan, and a variety of other malign actors around the world, such as Russia, China. The point is that the genocide thing that they're upset about isn't happening, and it's an anti-Semitic lie. So I think it's really important that we have to disambiguate between people who genuinely hold these beliefs, mistakenly, of course, but they think they're true. But the reason they hold those views is because they are essentially repeating the talking points of anti-Semites who have started these lies in the first place. And I think that's the really critical nuance that we have to draw out of this, is there's a lot of innocent, perfectly well-meaning people who have been sucked into this anti-Semitic narrative on
Agreed.
purpose. That was the whole point of the information campaign, was to get people believing lies about the state of Israel.
Agreed. But it doesn't mitigate the fact that it doesn't take a genius to understand that when you're calling for death to an entire people, that you are now complicit in something that is evil. I don't care what you think about those people. We don't call for the death of any group of people on earth. Not the Russians for you invading Ukraine, not the Syrians for I mean, what, 1,500 are they called the Alawites? That were massacred in the last few weeks. Nobody cares. Nobody hears about it. So nobody's calling for the death of anyone but Jews. So I don't really care where the information is coming from. Anybody who is carrying these beliefs, no matter how well intentioned, is carrying hate. Period. The double standards and the willingness, the apologeticism, if that's a word, for people who no longer have agency of understanding that calling for death to anybody is inappropriate. I mean, nobody's even calling. Let's say that, like, so Glastonbury, he's calling for the death of the IDF. Let's pretend that he actually means the IDF. Nobody's calling for the death of the Russian army, for example, who invaded Ukraine. And by the way, the IDF is fighting a defensive war, something else that we're not going to compare Israel to Russia, because Israel didn't start the war, but they are both invading forces, but for different reasons, right? So death to the IDF pretends to be some sort of slogan against a war, but it's not. It's about Jews. It just is.
Maybe. I mean, I don't think everything is. I think what we're seeing is the end result of a dehumanization campaign against Israel, and that's the key thing here. And that's why these narratives of colonial settlers and go back to Europe, and this narrative that Israel is somehow now the Goliath wailing on the David of the Palestinians. It's the very deliberate twisting of thousands of year old tropes about Jews, but they've just turned it into against just Zionists. We're just being anti-Zionist, because Zionists are colonial settlers and therefore deserve to be kicked off the land between the river and the sea and sent back to Europe, which, as anyone who has been to Israel knows, is absolute nonsense, because Israelis are mostly darker than I am, and I'm pretty dark, with a bunch of Mediterranean genes floating around in me. I do go very brown in the sun, but Israelis are certainly darker than I am, and they certainly don't look like my Polish friends, quite frankly.
Right.
And it's the end result of that dehumanization, and in their little heads, they think they're doing the right thing, I think. And that's the really weird, twisted thing about this, is they've dehumanized Israelis to such an extent through this disinformation campaign that people can be persuaded to call for their deaths and think they're the good guys. It's hats off. It's been a hell of an information campaign, quite frankly. One for the textbooks, beyond doubt.
So let me go back when I say that hate is hate, and nobody who is engaging in this kind of very blatant anti-Semitism is innocent, regardless of the information that they're receiving. Andrew, Do you think that it's because you're a decent human being or because you've been to Israel? You're hearing the same information, the same BBC information, and you're drawing very different conclusions. You think it's only because you've been to Israel or because you have a sense of right and wrong?
Yeah, potentially, but I've also been a Middle East student for a very long time, and spend most of my time writing and learning about this. I think part of the problem here is most of these people don't think more than fingernail deep when it comes to this stuff. They just see what they see on social media, go, "Wow, that's awful what the Israelis are doing,
Sure.
aren't they bastards?" and then get on with their day. And then in that atmosphere that's been created, if someone goes, "Death to the IDF," they go, "Yeah, yeah, fuck them, they're doing a genocide." And it's I just think it's stupidity and a lack of education more than, for the most part, when it comes to the volume of this. I think it starts with seriously malign actors saying seriously malign things on purpose to twist people, and then they rely on a lack of education and a high level of ignorance to kind of push it to the masses. And that doesn't mean there aren't academics out there who have genuinely looked at this and gone, "Oh yeah, this is terrible." And whether they're malign or just very bad at their jobs, they should know better. They should know better. There's some dreadful, dreadful academic work on this.
Yeah,
I don't think these people are necessarily. Some of them are evil. Some of them are nakedly taking money from. And I could give you names, but I'm not going to because I
sure.
can't be asked
But
to
again,
kind of draw that fire. But some people are just terrible at their jobs, and that's that.
but my question again, Andrew, is do you think as Andrew Fox, you are capable in any capacity, even if you weren't a researcher, to call for the death of any people? Listen, I'm a Jew. I don't call for the death to the people of Gaza or the people of Iran or the people like critical thinking people know that hate is hate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind when Hamas die or when Russian soldiers die in Ukraine. I mean, I can't say that I'll raise a tear. And in some cases, when it's Mohammed Dave or Sinwar, I'm pretty chuffed, if I'm honest. So,
But
I can see
but you're
circumstances where individuals I know to be evil are dead that I would be pleased.
I'm not talking about individuals. You're conflating individuals with
Yeah,
population.
calling for a whole race of people, absolutely not, of course.
Okay, so that's my point. That's my point is that any normal person who understands the concept of hate should know that calling for the death of any group of people is wrong. End of story. Hard stop. Okay, that being said, that is not the topic of today's conversation. So today's conversation is about the bad BDA, meaning that the battle the battle damage assessments that have been out there have been like all over the place. From like, yeah, nothing was really harmed to it's been completely obliterated. And so I want to talk about that today. And I want to start with actually, I wrote about this last week on my Substack. And I wrote it 2 days after I wrote down my outline. And I'm realizing I need to write the articles the second I have the idea. And I need to get that from you, Andrew, because it always astounds me how quickly you come out with the information. I'm like, oh, let me think about this for a few days, and then it's old. But in my very unprofessional estimation, BDA is a false flag, just like civilian casualties were a false flag or are a false flag. As you and John Spencer have talked about many, many times, there's no other wars other than those involving Israel where civilian casualties is considered some sort of relevant measure. And I would say that for different reasons, the BDA is also in that camp. And by the way, the civilian casualty thing, let's just go back, another double standard. Okay, we're not going to get into that. So here's the thing. The way that I see it, regardless of whether it was a day's worth of damage or a decade's worth of damage, the overall message was the USA is willing to step in and Israel is not going to back down. And 46-year wars don't end in 12 days. You could call it whatever you want, like maybe like kinetically and consecutively, that's going to be 10 days. But let's be honest, this war is not over. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if we're doing strategic analysis and we're looking at, if we're trying to gauge an assessment of the success or the failure of the war, and we're trying to do some serious military thinking, the BDA is important. And that's, the war's not over, but the extent to which those nuclear facilities are damaged, and I don't know, and you don't know the exact extent. And I'm not going to claim that I know, because that would be hubris, frankly. The amount of damage is important if you're trying to analyze where this goes next, because if Iran still has every for it, quite if they are set back decades, and that changes the entire strategic focus of the region. So it's it's an important thing for that perspective. But yeah, I think American domestic politics are an interesting beast at the moment. It was obviously a very clever game Mr. Trump played during the war, and he was swayed in the end, I think, at the last minute to jump in and unleash those bunker busters on Fordo. And it's clearly in America's political best interests to claim that it was the greatest military success of all time, because it makes Donald Trump look good. And I think in many ways that was the final deciding factor that persuaded him to drop the bombs. But you're right. The critical point does remain that there has now been an intent shown. That intent has been followed through on, and that is a very clear message to Tehran that if they step out of line, at least for the next 3 years, then America will get involved again, and that does make the whole region potentially safer.
Yeah, and 3 years is a very short time if you're talking nuclear breakout, but it's a significant time if you're talking about negotiations or demands on where they have to go. Here's the thing: like, Trump just gave Iran a very healthy dose of vitamin B2 straight in their ass, and I think personally they got the message. So, like, after this attack, like right after, right, like right before he dropped the F bomb, Trump is basically like, okay, one and done, right? That's what he said. Anyone paying attention know that meant the first one is done. But we'll do whatever we have to if we need to, when we need to. I don't believe that Trump just washed his hands over or washed his hands of future military action. I don't believe that at all. And as far as I see it, Khamenei is like message received to an extent. So bear with me. On one hand, he's not hiding in a bunker for no reason. Okay, he's probably not willing to play the game of Mother May I. Wait, do you have the game Mother May I out there?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a bunch of kids or whatever, because honestly, this is all playground politics, that stand on a line, and like one says, "Mother, may I take whatever 5 ballet steps forward?" And the mother makes an arbitrary decision, yes or no, and then the kid makes up like a ballet step, and the next person might ask for a frog step, and it's just a silly like get to the end of the thing. So anyway, Mother May I is just asking some random kid for permission of how you're going to live your life. And I guess now is Daddy May I, because that was, I think that was just vernacular, but boy, are they running with that in America. But I don't see him like bending to ask Israel and US if he could use his own airspace to get the hell out of Iran. Even though I think that we would be willing to, let him vacate and let the regime fall as it may. I don't think he would ever be that humble as to say, I need, like his negotiator had to ask Israel to use his own airspace to get out of the country. So my guess is, to use sort of like a Netanyahu phrase, that if he has to dig a tunnel with his fingernails to get out of this, Khamenei, sorry, I think will eventually wind up in Russia with Assad, if not dead.
That's very bold prediction. I'm not sure I agree. I think the first thing is that we've not seen any of the indicators or warnings to suggest that the regime's in trouble right now. I think that they're still
Wait, in trouble or willing to admit they're in trouble?
No, I don't think I don't think we've got any indicators to say that the regime's in any real
Okay.
existential danger right now. I think the brutal put down of anyone suspected of being connected to Israel, it sends a very strong message. I think last time I checked, it was 700 arrests, and they were already in double figures of executions. We haven't seen any real popular uprising, and Iran has enough security internally to stop anything that does uprise. 500,000 men with arms is more than enough to put down a rebellion, especially when you look at the geography of Iran and how difficult it is to move around as an insurgent in any kind of mass. We haven't seen the military changing size, and in fact, what we've probably seen with the assassination of the senior generalship is the young guns stepping up who are actually known to be more extreme than the guys that were killed. So the only real internal tension I've seen is potentially from the new IRGC commanders who could potentially you know, not overthrow the ayatollah, but certainly remove power from him, because they don't see him as being hardline enough. So there's that internal tension. So and then the final thing is, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the negotiations go, and I think it's only then we can decide whether this has actually been a success or a failure.
Right.
Because if Iran comes away with terms that are in any way positive, and Trump is already playing his deal games where he's talking
Right.
about, I was going to lift sanctions, but now I'm not going to, where he goes for that maximalist position where he says stupid stuff that's just not going to happen, and then walks it backwards in the negotiations. If Iran gets sanctions relief off the back of this, that's really concerning, because they only have to look 3 years into the future, change of president, slowly, quietly rebuild in the background, and then they can go again for another round. Because they think in decades, not electoral cycles. So I'm much less optimistic that Iran has been reined in beyond the end of the Trump presidency.
So one thing that you and I definitely don't share is a appreciation for most things Trump vis-a-vis Israel. I have a tremendous respect for what's gone on, and even when in the back of my mind or the front of my mind I've questioned it, it's turned out that he's 2 steps ahead of me in this 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 dimensional game of chess. I don't think that he is as dumb as I think he purposely portrays himself as very simple, and I think he's actually a very brilliant person, and he's proven that with his. Oh, there goes the eyebrow. I feel like he's proven that with how he and BB have pulled off the last 5 or 6 months of back and forth, and really a lot of deception that just seemed to be Trump being an asshole, and it turned out that it was all a part of that game. Okay, that being said.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. There was no game being played. Trump didn't even decide to do the Iran thing until literally the day before. This was no 4D chess. This was just Trump working out what was best for Donald Trump and then deciding to go for it when he saw the opinion polls. He would always have taken a deal if Iran had come to the table with any kind of integrity. If that 60 days, if there'd been a deal in that time, he'd have 100% taken it, and there's no doubt about that in my mind.
Well, the doubt is what terms he would have agreed to, and I think that that's where you and I are disagreeing, because it's very easy to say, art of the deal. He just wants a deal. He just wants a bad deal. We've been saying that also about Hamas, but we haven't seen that bad deal actually. I'm going to say that the hostage deal wasn't favorable to Israel, but it also got 33 hostages out, and getting Idan Alexander out with no strings attached, and I'm sure in the back of your mind you're saying there's some sort of strings, and it's this and that, but ultimately I feel like the deals are moving in the direction where we are finally in a position, we meaning Israel and US, to demand the release of all hostages. That we're finally in a position where, I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen, but where it's going to be back on the negotiation table. I truly believe that. But I just
And
want
I
to
do
go
too,
back.
because
Yeah.
Qatar have shown with Edan Alexander that they can just get hostages released at will. and actually the fact that nobody is actually calling that accountability on Qatar for that is baffling to me, because if they can do it for Adan Alexander, they can do it for the others who might still be alive. And actually, there's a deafening silence around Qatar, that they haven't been called out on that kind of obvious shenanigans that they're playing.
Since day one, you mean?
Yep.
In 630 days? I mean, it's just like it's becoming, for those of us who are in the hostage fight, right? Like, even forefront in the mind, the number is painful, but I think that it's become so normalized that we're like, oh, another day, instead of like, holy shit, we have got to get the hostages out, and they should have been released again, like 632 or whatever, however many days it's been. I should know from now. But right now with Iran, so Qatar, of course, is a whole nother ball of wax. I mean, a ball of wax that comes on a very big plane, too. But Trump is in deal making mode. The Art of the Deal was more than a book. Andrew, like him or hate him, we have to understand that he is one of the most successful deal makers of our generation. And that evolves. It has to. You can't write a book, put it in the world, and then say, this is my playbook for deal making, because then
I mean, I don't think Trump wrote that book. I think it was ghostwritten. But yeah.
You have Trump derangement syndrome. It's okay.
No,
But
Trump ghost wrote the book. It's a matter
okay.
of public knowledge that was ghostwritten.
I'm only joking. I just think it's funny that everything.
How many bankruptcies has he had? Is it
Yeah.
6, including
Hey,
a casino? How'd you
I'll tell you
bankrupt a
what.
casino?
But if I could make one of his $1 billion that he's made, I'd be pretty happy.
Well, all
So
you got to do is make a crypto coin and then dump it.
let's talk about that after this podcast. Maybe that's our next business together. So anyway, all signs pointed to Trump is ready to give them sanctions relief. We're gonna give all China's oil to them. Blah blah blah. So what the bleep is the ayatollah thinking, putting a fatwa on the head of Donald Trump while these negotiations still need to occur? And of course, Trump has made this weird statement about whether we even need a deal. We'll get into that. But then to also put a fatwa on the head of IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, after saying that they're going to leave the nuclear non-proliferation agreement, it doesn't exactly message to the world civilian nuclear program.
No, and I don't think, even the fact they enriched uranium to 60% shows that it's not simply a civil matter. But there's a really important part of Iranian foreign policy that revolves around honor, and these are clearly, as was the attack on Doha, these are clearly things that this is directed at a domestic audience. This isn't for the American public. This isn't for international foreign relations. This is to do with showing strength to the Iranian public. And if you look at the messaging that's been coming out of Iran, they won that war. That's their line. We won. We resisted. We survived. America threw the biggest bomb in the world at us, and guess what? We're still here in Tehran, and we're still running your country, and we had great success in resisting the Jews and the Americans. That's their line, and this is clearly part of that continued messaging. Because yes, he's got to find a way to deal with Trump, but he's also got a requirement to balance it with internal domestic Iranian messaging and positioning of the regime to make sure they shore up a regime that was briefly rocked.
Okay, now I'll agree with you completely on that, but there's only one thing. A fatwa is in America. Nobody in Iran is going to kill Trump. It's got to be one of their with sleeper cells or operators here in America. So it actually is an international statement to say that there's a fatwa on Trump's head. And by the way, I think Trump is exceedingly nice you know, they've already tried to kill him. I mean, at least twice that we know of. And he's like, that's okay. Let's put that aside. I think that there's a space for a deal. Like, at what, it reminds me of Israel, right? To take 9,000 missiles from Hezbollah before fighting back. And by the way, this has happened in every war and every conflict. You get 10,000 missiles, and finally Israel's like, and we're coming in. So, like, at what point is Fatwa it? Because it seems to be. Trump is saying, like, guys, I was seriously thinking sanction relief, and now I'm seriously not. Now, what he does under the table, I'm not sure where that's going to go. Again, I can't say that I'm the greatest negotiator in the world. In fact, I would argue I'm the worst. The first car I bought, I wanted so badly, I went to the guy and said, I'll pay you $2,000 extra. My dad's like, no, she won't. She didn't mean that. That's how I negotiate. But I think he's probably better than I am.
Yeah, I think he's also looking at the bigger picture in the Middle East, where it's a matter of expanding the Abraham Accords, which is going to be his legacy in his mind. You know, and that doesn't happen without some kind of normalization with Iran. So, you know, the Saudis have normalized with Iran. They are now in a far better position with them than they've been in a very long time. The Saudis will have set certain conditions for any steps towards normalization with Israel. And I suspect that one of those with the White House will have been that Iran needs to be kind of incentivized to not be the main destabilizing factor in the region for at least the period when Abraham Accords negotiations are going on, and therefore it's in Trump's best interests on that front to play nice with the Iranians, because without playing nice with them, there's absolutely no chance of the Abraham Accords discussion going any further. So there's wheels within wheels here, and I think that's kind of the prize that he's got his eyes set on.
So I always go back to, and again, like, I think it's very naive because you always push back on this, but I always go back to maximum pressure. I mean, like, you and I definitely disagree on, like, you think that in Gaza, there's no incremental value at this point to the idea of pounding Hamas. To me, I'm like, pound, pound, pound. We gotta we gotta force them to say the only way we're gonna survive is if we let go of the hostages. So I feel the same way about Iran. Yes. I mean, he literally tweeted to the Ayatollah the other day that you'll get more with honey than vinegar. Again, he's like, here's my playbook, guys. But the honey's got to be in limited supply. Eventually, the jar of honey empty, and it's time to apply the vinegar, and vinegar and vinegar and vinegar to the point where, like, it hits their throat, and they're like, ah.
Well, that's what we saw in the early months of this year with the 60-day negotiation period. You know, that was America trying their very best to be applying honey, and then Iran wouldn't play ball, so Trump was like, "Okay, Bibi, go for it."
Sure.
And here's the coup de grace because it makes us look good. You know, it's the same playbook again. We're now back, you know, and it's that escalatory ladder. I wrote about it on Substack, where you have negotiations, fine. You have the threat of force, fine. Okay, now there's force, but now we come back down to negotiations and diplomacy again, and that's the level we're at now. And it goes one of two ways. I think there's either a deal comes of it, or maybe more escalation. But I don't think anyone wants to see that in the Gulf, and I think that's the bigger factor. You know, there's so much could go wrong with another escalation in terms of global oil prices, because, you know, the last thing Trump wants is Americans to be paying more at the pump, because global oil barrel prices have gone through the roof because Iran has messed with the Strait of Hormuz. You know, one mine layer puts $25 a barrel onto the price. You know, and that also seriously damages other countries that the Americans are trying to set up good relations with. Saudi would be delighted. Higher oil prices would suit them down to the ground because they're in real financial trouble with the dollar price of a barrel of oil where it is. And it's going to derail a lot of their plans if that doesn't change. But everyone else would be pretty upset, I think. And so, you know, there's all these potential ramifications that go way beyond just Israel and just Iran, and affect vast other regions of the world. that America also wants to have a diplomatic effect on. So it's about trying to keep so many different plates spinning and making sure none of them drop.
Andrew, do the words drill, baby, drill mean anything to you? Or
Yeah, but
okay.
it doesn't matter because the global oil barrel price is the global oil barrel price. It doesn't matter if America's energy independent. It just means they'll be hit slightly less than other countries will. But
okay,
it's
hold
those
on, hold
but
on.
it's those other countries being hit that America is trying to make nice with and make deals with. That's the problem. It's not, yes, American gas prices will go up, but if certain parts of Europe or certain parts of the Indian subcontinent start getting hammered with oil price rises, that's going to cause real destabilization that America will then have to try and deal with. So it's much bigger than just the gas prices in the US. But either way, increased prices will affect them.
Okay, so here's how I see it a little bit differently. So America, Trump has been talking about drilling in these contested areas, environmentally contested areas since his first presidency. And he's gone ahead and done some of it. But I'm going to go ahead and argue if he uses this as a springboard of, hey, guys, want lower gas prices? It's time to drill, baby, drill. And by the way, let's start exporting en masse. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. I do believe that oil is the secret. I've been saying this for decades, is the secret to world peace. And by the way, the oil reserves are going to run out, possibly even in our lifetimes. So oil, including like in the ground, like we only have like finite resources in this world. And so what happens when the Middle East doesn't have oil anymore? Now, there are certain countries who are getting ready for that contingency. Iran doesn't happen to be one of them. So I don't believe personally that it's going to be as bad as that. And your original thing that you said is that the last thing that Trump wants is for Americans to have to pay X amount more at the pump. Keyword American. So I'm going to go back to that there could be a way to avert this financial disaster and accomplish his goals of increasing oil production in America simultaneously.
Yeah, but that does kind of screw the rest of the world, which I'm not super keen on, frankly.
Well, we can't all be lucky enough to be American.
Israel is not everything, and America is not everything. There are other countries if you choose to look for them on the map.
That's such bullshit. So, as one last point, or maybe you have other points, I do want to talk about like we need an agreement. Like it was so weird that Trump is like, we're doing this with or without an agreement. It's like, no, you're not the king. You're not going to be president forever. In 3 years, we're screwed. Well, first of all, we're screwed anyway. It's not like the IRGC like upholds agreements. Like, let's be honest, they're not as valuable as the paper they're written on, but it gives us international veracity if at least we have something, some sort of agreement to come back to and say they agreed to this, this, and this. And I can go through my wish list of what that is, but I think that it would be ridiculous for us to walk away without a formalized agreement.
Yeah, me too. But you have to get around to sign it, and that's how what pressure you use to do that is the far more challenging thing, I think, because what more is there to strike in Iran? Well, it's the regime. But if you strike the regime, then God knows what kind of can of worms you open in its place, especially if you get these IRGC hardliners being the ones who take over. And the last thing I think you want to do as well is strike so much in Iran that you screw over the Iranian people, who frankly are the innocent victims of this regime just as much as anyone else is.
IDF says that there's at least 150 more military targets. And by the way, there's this undisclosed, apparently, centrifuge or location nuclear production facility that undisclosed. I don't know how we know about undisclosed. It's like, how do you know what you don't know? But there's more to this story than this. And I bet the Mossad knows. This Mossad knows the details that I don't know. Dun, 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 dun. Oh,
If you enjoyed this, please do like, subscribe to us, and please feel free to leave any comments that you see fit. And don't forget to check out Shana's Yoga of War and my Substack, mrandrewfox.substack.com.
and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. Andrew, it's been real.
Cheers. See you later.
Bye.
No, you have to stop it at your end.
I know, it involves pressing buttons. Shalom.